Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Breber and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are going to continue our series of going position by position through the NBA and ranking these suckers. We are going to be ranking the top 10 small forwards in the league. And as we have addressed in every episode up to this point, positions do not exist in the same clear-cut way that they used to in the league. There may be some guys on this list who you consider a power forward. A lot of these guys you might just consider wings. Some of them you might consider a shooting guard. We've just done the best that we can to capture the position we think is most appropriate and put together a group that we can rank today. So, Logan, with that being said, before we get into the list itself, who was the toughest cut for you?
The toughest omission on my list was the newly acquired Sacramento King, DeMar DeRozan. And I find DeMar really hard to rank, man, because he plays a very exciting brand of basketball. And, like, if we were ranking, I want to be clear about something with DeMar. If we were ranking just, like, top bucket getters, I mean, DeMar, I think, is a shoo-in. But,
Of course.
I have some players in a similar archetype higher on my list. I think their impact is a little bit more multifaceted, and I think DeMar is limited a little bit by his lack of volume three-point shooting, but the guy is an elite clutch scorer. He is an elite bucket getter, an elite isolation scorer, an elite pick-and-roll scorer. If you need a bucket, DeMar's a great option, but like I said, I think there are guys that I prefer that are well-rounded, impact a little bit more, and I think he is limited by that volume three-point shooting. But he's a tough one, man. DeMar is a really fun basketball player, and in that context, like if I needed a clutch guy, if we're ranking our top 10 guys to go get me a late-game bucket, DeMar for sure, I think, is cracking the list.
This is fun, man. I had a feeling that we were going to disagree on DeMar on this list. I'm not going to spoil where I have him, but he is on my list, and I do feel like he's become a bit underrated. And we haven't even had a chance to talk about the Kings adding him on our show, and I feel like I've actually gotten higher on that move than I was initially. At first, I thought, this is fine. I think that I focused a little bit more on the concerns than I did the upside and the clear positives that he brings to that situation. It feels like that's kind of how everybody views DeMar right now. There's a very negative perception of him, and I think the pendulum has probably swung a bit too far from when he was in his Toronto days and he was the best guy on these great teams, but they weren't necessarily great because he was some star number one, but he was producing, he was fun, he was a dazzling scorer. Then people start to realize the flaws with the spacing, with not really high level efficiency, with the fact that at that time in his career he wasn't a great playmaker or defender, and the pendulum swings very, very far in the negative direction. I do think that it might still be sitting a little bit too far down in that direction, but we'll talk about that when we get to where DeMar is on my list. My toughest cut, Logan, is Franz Wagner, who I absolutely love. I have been a big fan of Franz over these last couple seasons. And if he just finds his three-point shot at the level that it was at in his rookie and sophomore campaigns, I do think that he'll probably be back in that top 10. It was just absolutely brutal this past year. He was 28% from deep in the regular season, 26% in the playoffs. There are so many things that he does at an above average level at the very least. He's awesome in transition. He's a really good athlete in the open floor, got a killer Euro step. In the half court, he's got his size. He's a shifty driver. He's a really awesome finisher, good length, good touch around the rim. I do really like his playmaking. He sees the floor well at his size, and he's a versatile defender, right? He's not a great positional rebounder, not like a super impactful low man, but in terms of guarding on the perimeter, moves really well for his size. Offensively, he's a low turnover player as well, and I think that he works well alongside another ball handler, right? He is a solid spot-up player when he's shooting the ball effectively. He can attack, pick his spots in transition, and he can create for you in the half court, particularly out of pick and roll. It's just the shot, man. It really is just how brutal the shot was this past year, because that made the playoffs pretty darn rough for the boy. Like, the bottom line production looks okay, gives you 19, 7, and 4, and he ate up free throws still, which is good because he was getting downhill some as a driver, but an effective field goal percentage of 45 was just killer. And there were several games in which he was basically a no-show. I mean, particularly Game 7 was just a really, really tough watch. So it's that inconsistency as a creator and as a shot maker at this point that keeps him just outside of my top 10, but there's no question that he will climb in here and he will climb even higher than that 10 spot because he's just going to continue to improve. And he does have overall a very well-rounded game.
Franz was a tough cut for me, too. I thought he was a lock to be on this list, and he was actually the second guy off. DeMar's the first, and Franz I had in my 12 spot. It really is just about the jump shot. He shot 30% on pull-ups. He was a 29% catch and shooter. Shot 28% on jump shots overall this last season. But I'm encouraged that he's going to figure it out. I talked about in some of our previous episodes projections. Like, I think Franz has a very good chance of cracking this list by the end of next season. And I think he's got great touch. The guy shot 47% on floaters. He shoots 85% from the free throw line. I'm very, very confident that in the long term, Franz is going to figure that out and be a really good, well-rounded basketball player. You don't even mention it, too. I mean, I think Franz is an excellent, or you mentioned it briefly on the perimeter. I mean, he's an excellent defender. So he's got that going for him, too. I think Franz has a very good chance of being here next season and being here one day. He was a very tough cut.
For sure. It's just the jump shot being that brutal leads to him being middling efficiency overall. And he doesn't have the A-plus trait that some other guys do. As much as I like what he does as a driver, he doesn't have the sort of scoring pop that several guys above him do have on this list. As much as I like his playmaking, right? He's not like a real high-end playmaker. He's the guy who does a lot of things at a B to B plus level, but the shot has to be part of that for him to be the sort of all-around star-level impact guy that I definitely believe he can be going forward. I'm interested, Logan, because I thought that Franz was a clear number 11, and the fact that you have both him and DeMar off really makes me wonder who is in your 10 spot.
As am I. I am very fascinated, and Carson, you bring up that A-plus trait, that A-plus quality. The guy in my 10 spot has that quality, and that is shooting, and my 10 spot is Michael Porter Jr.
Wow.
This last season, MPJ put up 17, 7, and 2 on 48, 40, 84 splits on a true shooting of 60%. And I just really value that quality. I consider it to be invaluable. I think it makes him a lock on this list, the elite shooting. Now, what's difficult with MPJ in the shooting is the volatility that comes with it, the reliance on that as your sole offense as a player. In his career, he's got 3 playoff series under 35% from behind the arc. And, right, that can just be an absolute killer. It was a big part of why the Nuggets offense just stalled out in these playoffs. He did not pull his weight whatsoever, and he is limited as a self-creator. But he's also got 6 playoff series over 40% from deep. And I just think he is one of the best pure shooters in all of basketball. He's an 85th percentile spot-up player. He shot 44% on jumpers last season. He was a 43% catch and shooter on 5 attempts a night. He shot 40% on pull-ups. He shot 37% on step-backs, 35% on step-back threes, 52% out of the mid-range. He's one of the best pure shooters in all of basketball, point-blank period. And I think that A-plus trait, that A1 trait, I really value it. The floor spacing, the elite rebounding. I think that when you're looking at this number 3 kind of mold, I'd like a guy that can complement my superstar, and MPJ is just an elite shooter. I don't want one bad playoff run to kind of overshadow that. I don't want that to, just completely wash away how great MPJ can be. And I sympathize with what MPJ was going through in these playoffs, right? He had a lot of family stuff going on. I think that had a little bit of a toll on him. And he can individually help you swing a playoff series with that elite shooting. And I think this was the absolute bottom of what we're going to get out of MPJ moving forward. I think this is the absolute floor, what we got in this last playoff series. And so I debated, man. Like, there is a real gap between when you look at all the things that Franz can do with you in a multifaceted sort of fashion. When you look at how elite DeMar can be as a lead scorer, right? He is just a better pure scorer of the basketball than MPJ. But I really value that floor spacing. I value the elite catch and shooting that he brings you. He doesn't need to have the ball in his hands, the plays that you can draw up for him. And he's an elite rebounder. So it's that A-plus trait,
He's not
Carson.
an elite rebounder. He's a good rebounder.
He's a really good rebounder. I mean, he's rebounded his ass off in these last 2 playoff runs.
Yeah, but he gives you 7 rebounds a night, Logan. We must be careful with the word elite now.
I mean, for his position, I think MPJ's an excellent rebounder. Like, he's
6'10". He's a very good rebounder.
Yeah. Over the guys that I left off this list, I think he's clearly better than, like, DeMar and Franz. But it's that A-plus trait. I think MPJ is one of the best pure shooters of the basketball on the planet, and that's why he's on my list.
He's not just one of the best pure shooters on the planet. He's one of the best pure shooters we have ever seen in the history of this game. It is absolutely absurd what he can do at his size, any level of contest, any footwork, any level of movement. Like, he's just an absolute deadeye. He has a laser beam at all times. This is a pretty crazy ranking to me, though, just because he is by far the most one-dimensional player who we will talk about today. Now, that's not to say that he hasn't improved in some of the peripheral areas of his game. As a rebounder, as a defender, he has improved and has become solid there, where early in his career, he was just a massive negative. As a playmaker, it's subtle, right? I mean, he's still only going to give you an assist and a half a night, but he has gotten smarter about moving the ball, not quite forcing up as many highly contested jumpers. But ultimately, that's still a big limitation of his, right? He is clearly a well below average playmaker. He is a fine defender. He's not doing anything at a legitimately high level outside of that pure, unreal catch and shoot ability. And I just think his major limitations as a self-creator keep him off of this list for me, because I do think that he is in the perfect spot in Denver. There is nowhere else where he is going to be manufactured so many high quality looks and not asked to create for himself whatsoever as a number 3, because the Jamal Jokic two-man game is so overwhelmingly dominant. And then you see when you do need a little bit more offensive juice, when it would have been great if somebody could get a bucket for themselves, if somebody could run pick and roll with Jokic other than a struggling Jamal Murray. MPJ, you don't even consider in a role like that, right? It's just not in his bag. The handle is not nearly what it would need to be. Ever since he just absolutely wrecked his back in college, he just cannot explode whatsoever. The first step is non-existent. So when I compare him to a DeMar DeRozan, I think that this is very much DeMar being a victim of circumstance and MPJ having a little bit of that good old-fashioned I play with Nikola Jokic privilege, because the sheer gap in on-ball creation to me is overwhelming. I mean, DeMar can give you an efficient 25 points, 5 assists a night, like 90th percentile self-creation, legitimately good playmaking. MPJ could never dream of that. So I think that he is in a very favorable situation where it's like, great, if you can be a third option who doesn't really eat up any usage, and your top 2 are so great that that's exactly what you want, this quick hitting attack within the flow, lethal spot up shooter, that's awesome. That's a very unique situation though. And again, even in Denver, even in that situation, MPJ's shortcomings as his team's 4th best player in this run did hurt them. And he really, really struggled. Now, I agree with you that we shouldn't judge him based off of that, because he's such a great shooter that I do think you can normally bank on it. But everybody above him, I just think, is a much more gifted self-creator or has a much more pronounced two-way impact. In my number 10 spot, though, I do have a guy who has something in common with Michael Porter Jr., and that is that they are just ridiculous contested shot makers. Neither of them are guys who have really any sort of notable quickness off the bounce. They're just going to rain tough jumpers over you, and that is Khris Middleton. Middleton is very interesting because the story of the last couple years of his career has just been a lack of availability. But the last 2 times that we have seen him in the playoffs, 11 games, his last 2 series, he's given you 24, 8, and 5.5 on 59% true shooting. And last year, he's playing limited minutes, but per 36, he gave you 20.6 rebounds and 7 assists a night on 60% true shooting. And when I mention that self-creation, dude, and that on-ball creation, both for himself and teammates, including passes, he was an 86th percentile pick and roll creator this past year and a 96th percentile isolation creator. Like, really, really impressive stuff. And that is because he is just an absurd shot maker. Shot nearly 59% for mid-range, Logan, the best mid-range shooter by efficiency in basketball, and 38% from deep. Ridiculous efficiency both off the catch, 61% effective field goal percentage on his catch and shoot jumpers, and nearly 56% on pull-up jumpers. Like, that singular ability is absolutely ludicrous, and it makes him a legitimately efficient star creator on ball, even though, again, he's not going to get to the rim consistently whatsoever. He's not going to get to the line consistently whatsoever. And a big separator between him and an MPJ is that he is a legitimately skilled playmaker. He has improved throughout his career in his ability to create for others by a lot. He'll hit those pocket passes. He'll find the poppers. He'll find the shooters in the corner. I would say he is legitimately good there. But there are clear limitations just in terms of his ability to get by people, to create easy stuff for himself. He almost never gets to the rim. 10% of his shots come inside of 3 feet. And even in this awesome, ridiculous series that he had in the first round this year, it was 7% of his shots coming inside of 3 feet. So that is tough. You cannot consistently bank on a shot diet like that. And that's what we saw from Middleton in, for example, the 2021 title run, when even that was a really good run from him, right? The highs were high, but the lows were low. There was an inconsistency. In 2022, when he did play 2 games in that run, was mostly hurt, but he did play 2 games, he really struggled. So when you are just that reliant on contested jump shots, no matter how good you are, there is volatility when you don't get to the rim, when you don't get to the line. And when that's not going, then you're looking at an average defender. He's an average rebounder and a good, not great playmaker. So that's the thing. I do worry that it's like in these last 2 playoff runs, we've seen, oh man, the shot making from Middleton has just been ludicrous. And it very well could be that in this coming playoffs, we see the exact flip side of that, where he goes ice cold, and then it's just like, oh man, it's really, really rough when you can't bank on that offense in the paint. But when I compare him to like Franz Wagner, my toughest cut, I think that gap in offensive skill is too great. I do trust Middleton there because he is that level of shot maker, but the volatility and the lack of high level impact outside of that in some of the peripheral areas of the game makes me quite comfortable with him at number 10.
And it's about the easy offense, right? I mean, that's what you're getting at. But I don't know if there's a world, and maybe this will age like milk, we'll see. I don't ever really see a world where Middleton just completely disappears. He is one of the best tough shot makers in all of basketball. Middleton's touch is unreal, man. That guy has one of the smoothest jumpers. It's pretty, man. It's a beautiful brand of basketball. Like, no, he has athletic limitations. He has rim pressuring limitations. He has limitations for sure, but when he's on, it's special to watch, man. He was a 41% catch and shooter, Carson. He shot 53% on stepbacks and 57% on fadeaways, 49% on pull-up jumpers. Like, the guy is just stupid as an off-the-dribble shot maker. And I have Middleton at 8, so I have him 2 spots higher. There's a guy in my 9 spot that is in a very similar archetype to Middleton. Limited athletically, a tough shot maker, a tough bucket getter, and I think Middleton is the better version of him. But I just think there's so many easy ways that you can draw up stuff for Middleton, man. As a catch and shooter, running handoffs for him. He was 96th percentile on handoff plays last season. He's a 74th percentile spot-up guy. So when we're looking at that role, the off-ball, the third guy, the tertiary leader, I just think Middleton does a lot of things at a high level that you can bank on, man. Again, the shooting, the spacing, and I think he is underrated as a playmaker and a ball handler. I was really impressed in this last run against Indiana where you got to see him really run the offense, and he did a really good job. The athletic limitations and the scoring inside the arc are the reason, or inside the paint specifically, because he's the best mid-range scorer in basketball. Those are the reasons that he can't be higher on my list, but I think when you're looking at the premier tough shot makers in basketball, Middleton is a part of the handful of best in all of the league. So those limitations that you mentioned are why he can't be higher on the list, but in this role, in this archetype, I think he's one of the best in the league.
He is, but he is a dramatic version of relying on tough shot making. And you say that you struggle to see the world in which, like, the shots aren't falling. I mean, we've just seen it before, right? The 2020 playoffs, he's under 51% true shooting. He's 39% from the field. 2021, I mentioned, I did consider that a really impressive run from him overall. Still under 55% true shooting, and there's a handful of performances where it is really, really tough, and he is basically an offensive no-show. Like, just over the course of his career, both in the regular season, but in the playoffs, you see it as well. Like, there's just a clear ceiling in terms of the efficiency that he can reach. Like, we're talking about under 56% true shooting because it's always tough shots. And that's where I just lean on the guys who have some of the easier stuff that they can create for themselves more consistently. So who is in that 9 spot for you, Logan?
As I mentioned, a guy in a similar archetype as a tough shot maker. I have Brandon Ingram in my 9 spot. And
wow. I'm really interested in your list. I'm not going to lie. You're intriguing me, Logan.
Ingram's tough to rank, especially with the injury concerns from last season. He was dealing with a left knee injury. In comparison to MPJ, I do prefer Ingram's self-creation to, where MPJ might have the edge as just a pure shooter of the basketball. And I think Ingram has grown in some ways, man. I think he's really grown as a playmaker, as a decision maker, as a ball handler. And I think last year's kind of hard to gauge, again, with the injury concerns from him. A lot of the things we just said about Middleton, I think, apply to Brandon Ingram. We talk about the athletic limitations, the rim pressuring. When you were leading up to Middleton, I thought that's what you were going to go with, Carson. I thought you were describing Brandon Ingram, actually, talking about not being able to really blow by guys and create easy offense for himself. And so, again, when I'm talking about this kind of archetype, it's tough. Brandon Ingram's not getting anything easy, and I think you see that in games where they're without Zion or where he's expected to pull his weight even more. Again, it's important to emphasize that he was dealing with an injury in some of these games, and so it's just that much tougher. But you see it. Again, nothing really is coming easy for Ingram. Everything is a jump shot over the top of somebody. It is a difficult jumper. And again, as we mentioned with MPJ and Middleton, there's just inherent volatility with that. But when he's on, he's really great there. He scored 8 pull-up points per game this last season. That's tied 18th in all of basketball. Shot 48% in the mid-range, 48% on pull-ups, 46% on fadeaways. He's a tough shot maker, and he really has grown in these other areas that we talk about: playmaking, decision-making, ball handling. But when I compare him to a guy like Middleton, who I put him over, I think Middleton's probably on the same level or comparable as a ball handler and playmaker. I actually probably prefer B.I. just a little bit in terms of playmaking, but it's pretty slight there. But I think Middleton there's a gap between him and Ingram in terms of touch and difficult shot making. Like, I just think Middleton is a better tough shot maker. I think he is better at this role in scoring. And so it's really close between these two guys for me, but I think Middleton is just the better pure scorer. I trust his touch more. I trust his shot more than I do Brandon Ingram's. And I'm hopeful that next season he can come back healthy and we can actually gauge and see Brandon Ingram, with hopefully a better team, a healthier team with Zion back fully and with Ingram not having to deal with these health concerns. So Ingram I found pretty tough to rank, but I think he's definitively behind other guys in this archetype, especially Middleton, man. I think Middleton is just a better tough shot maker.
I do think that Middleton is a better pure tough shot maker, but I think that B.I. is better at basically everything else on the basketball court because, yes, fundamentally these guys do have a lot of similarities, right? You're not getting much easy offense, but you are getting more easy offense with B.I., right? Where we talk about Middleton, it's under 10% of his shots coming inside 3 feet. With B.I., it's 15%. Low for a star, but closer to average. Middleton took 2 free throws a game this regular season, Logan. B.I. is getting you 5 free throws a game. So I do think that the gap in pure difficult shot making, which does lean Middleton, is offset by the gap in easy offense that B.I. gets, because B.I. is still a really good difficult shot maker, right? He's not as great as Middleton, but 48% from the mid-range this year, super impressive. And so overall, I think both these guys are going to hover in that range of average efficiency where they lean on their difficult shot making and there's some volatility. B.I. just has a little bit more of a security blanket banked in there, but clearly it wasn't enough in these playoffs, and that's why I don't think it's crazy to have B.I. down at 9. I have him just 1 spot higher at number 8, and it couldn't get worse than it did. I mean, this was an absolutely brutal matchup for him. You mentioned dealing with some injury stuff. Lou Dort was sensational defensively throughout these playoffs and just ate B.I. alive. And I think that sort of hyper-physical defense can bother him. A guy who can knock him off of his spot, get up in his airspace, and he can't get a step. Like 14 a night on 45% true shooting, dude, was just brutal. It was brutal to watch. This was the worst basketball that we've ever seen Brandon Ingram play, but he does have his limitations, and there's just guys above him who are more seamless creators for themselves. B.I., 76th percentile pick and roll scorer, which is pretty good, but just 55th percentile isolation, 22nd percentile post-up scorer. Like, there's not a bunch of very easy stuff coming there. In the Middleton comparison, I agree with you. I slightly lean B.I. as a playmaker. I do think he's underrated there. He's really quite good, sees a lot at his size. Really nice velocity as a one-handed passer, can hit those skip passes. Not an elite playmaker, but certainly a good one. And his one-on-one defensive ceiling is pretty high. I'd say it's definitely higher than Middleton. He's not necessarily a great team defender, but just in terms of taking on a one-on-one wing matchup, he's pretty good. But overall, it's not like you're getting a real pronounced plus impact from him consistently on the defensive side of the ball. And that's where I just think his reputation historically probably exceeds his impact as a basketball player right now. And the Pelicans were actually slightly worse with him on the floor this past year. And 2 years ago, they were just slightly better with him on the floor. We're talking about like a point per 100 possessions in either direction, which means basically it doesn't matter if he's out there in terms of their net rating. So to me, that just speaks to the fact that when he has his limitations as a volume three-point shooter, which is a big thing. Like, he was under 4 three-pointers attempted a night on 35% from deep. That makes him a clunky fit offensively, and he's not getting a bunch of easy stuff. That's why it's weird when you try to play him, especially with Zion and with a non-shooting center. But I think it makes him a tougher fit offensively in a lot of situations than people really acknowledge. And because he doesn't have that sort of A-level impact in any of the areas of his game outside of that difficult shot making, that's why I think we ultimately view him in a pretty similar range, and I have him at number 8. My number 9 is a very different basketball player, Logan. I have Scottie Barnes here, and I'm interested in where you have him. Scottie had a breakout season this year. He obviously won Rookie of the Year, but then very much plateaued, if not even slightly took a step back maybe in year 2. But he sprung back forward this year, gave you 28 and 6 on 56.5% true shooting. The area in which he is clearly behind everybody on this list for me is that his half-court self-creation is just more labored because of the lack of high-end skill. We're talking about a lot of tough buckets. That is not Scottie Barnes. He's only 49th percentile as a pick-and-roll scorer, 18th percentile as an isolation scorer. He's a good athlete, but he's not just going to toast you with his first step a lot, and then the touch is very inconsistent. His offensive game is really and truly clunky, and it always has been. But his value is in his versatility, that he can attack you in numerous ways. He's really good getting out and pushing in transition. He's a good cutter, and his playmaking is quite good. That's a legitimate strength of his. And his shot has improved significantly. He went from like being a complete non-shooter in his first 2 years to 34% from deep on 5 attempts a game this year. It's still not great, but it is big improvement. The reason that Scottie isn't as high on this list as I think he can climb, given his skill set, is just because defensively, I don't think he's reached his potential yet. And in terms of playmaking, he was very impressive this year. Gave you 2.8 stocks per game, and he's a good rebounder, but I thought Scottie was just an elite defensive prospect, and I don't think he's tapped into that yet. I think that he has potential to be more on that end. He hasn't shown us like elite lateral quickness in terms of his ability to defend on the perimeter. He's not a super impactful low man. He's decent there, and he's just not playing with super high effort at all times, which in Toronto as your number one option in a losing situation, you can understand. So it's the fact that he hasn't reached his defensive ceiling and the fact that he is still clunky and weird offensively that to me keeps him down in this 9 spot, but I think he's too productive to be any lower than this.
This will flow nicely. Scottie's in my number 7 spot, and quite frankly, Carson, I don't think Scottie's reached his defensive potential. I also don't think he's reached his offensive potential. Yeah. I'm very encouraged by what we saw this last season. That he's got way more to get into. One, I think his jump shot is going to continue to get better. You mentioned, coming out the draft, man, Scottie's offensive game was janky. I compared him to looked like Bambi on ice skates, man. Like he was goofy a little bit. Like the way Scottie moved, it was just a little goofy, and he's gotten better in terms of coordination. I know these aren't great numbers, but these are massive improvements. 32% on pull-ups, 32% on step-backs, 38% out of the mid-range. Those are legitimate improvements for Scottie. That's almost like doubling what he was doing in his first 2 seasons. He's a 39% catch-and-shooter, 39% as a jump shooter, and inside the restricted area, he was 70%. So what you're seeing is the framework for something great, and you talk about his waning effort in Toronto. I think it's a blessing and a curse. I think because he is the number 1 option here in Toronto, Scottie has an opportunity to just take shots and to grow his game in a way other guys don't because the team is so far away from being in real contention. That's why I am encouraged that I think Scottie could maybe climb to top 5 on this list one day. I don't know if it'll be next season, but I think he has the potential and the framework offensively and defensively to maybe get there one day. And specifically, if Scottie leans into, he's such a big dude and such a strong guy and such a great athlete, if Scottie can work on his post game a little more, where he's attacking mismatches relentlessly, spinning off of guys, and really weaponizing that strength and athleticism, there's something there where Scottie could be a really reliable number one or number two if he taps into that. Because I always think the jump shot is going to be, I don't think it's going to be great. I don't think you're ever going to be a great jump shooter if you're Scottie Barnes. I think he can be a really good one. 37% from deep. I think he can be a good, not great pull-up jump shooter. But if he can really tap into those physical and athletic traits that he has and, get a reliable or a consistent form of offense, and I think that's on the low block in the post, that's where Scottie's going to be a great offensive player if he becomes that one day. And then defensively, I agree with you. I don't really hold that against him. Toronto's not winning any meaningful basketball games right now. The framework for a great defense, that's where I really want to see Toronto. I want to see Toronto, and it sucks because they let OG Anunoby go, right? One of the best wing defenders in basketball. If they could put some other great defensive personnel around him, I think you could see Scottie maybe go up even another level. But as you mentioned, the playmaking was great. 1.3 steals per game, 1.5 blocks per game. And Scottie's menacing on the perimeter, dude. There's a ton of clips last season from where guys are thinking they're going to get a wide open three, and Scottie comes out of nowhere with his Carson Breber arms and just swats something. So I think this is the low end for Scottie. I think if he continues at the trajectory that he was on after year 3, we see his jumper get better. We see him lean into really reliable offense and continue to improve defensively. I think Scottie could climb even higher, but the offensive and scoring limitations are still real right now. I still feel like he's a far way away from what he will be offensively.
Yeah, the efficiency is a bit rough right now, and you talk about having confidence in him improving as a jump shooter. I think we saw great improvement off the catch. I do not think Scottie will ever be a guy. I would not bet that he is ever a guy who is comfortable pulling up as a jump shooter. I mean, this year it was 1 pull-up 3 a game, 17% on pull-up threes. And it's just janky, man. He just doesn't have a fluid shot like that.
It's important. He only averaged 2.1 pull-up points per game. That's tied 118th in the NBA. In comparison to other, actually any other number one creator in basketball, that's an abysmal number. Everybody else, even again, that's Ingram's bread and butter. He's at 8 points per game, and he's got the rock in his hands, way less than Scottie. So it is a damning number. You don't ever think he gets to being a good jump shooter.
Just specifically the pull-up. Specifically the pull-up game, I don't think is ever going to be a legitimate part of his arsenal. And that is why I still have BI over him for the moment. Again, we just saw BI at his absolute low point, but there is a level of maturity as a half-court offensive creator, playmaking, and as a shot maker that I do bank on more with BI right now. I do think that it would be pretty darn tough for Scottie to succeed as a number one in that environment without continuing to progress in those half-court skill areas. But in my number 7, Logan, I have a guy who I think is just absolutely clearing Brandon Ingram in those categories, and it is the name who you mentioned as your toughest cut. I have DeMar DeRozan in my 7th spot, and I think that might surprise some people because, again, I do think that people are low on DeMar right now. He gave you 24 points, 5 assists a night on 58.5% true shooting this past season. And what I want to emphasize is that for everything that we can focus in on about the lack of volume 3-point shooting, about the lack of high-level defensive impact, about the lack of winning in recent years, he's still one of the best self-creators in the NBA. This man is a 91st percentile pick and roll scorer, and that number is pretty consistent year to year. 86th percentile isolation, 80th percentile post up. If there is somebody who you just need to get the ball to create himself an advantage, and by the way, he's a good playmaker as well. He's very efficient creating for others as well. With the ball in his hands, DeMar is one of the best in the league, and he still eats up free throws, actually as much as ever this past year, a free throw rate of 0.45. So he's getting to the line 8 times a game, and he's only taking about 18 shots. That's ridiculous. That's great for your efficiency. One of the mid-range masters in the modern NBA history, 47% for mid-range, and he is still smooth as hell, and he is still tough to stay in front of. He's not getting to the rim at the rate that he did necessarily in his prime, still taking 18% of his shots inside of 3 feet, though, which is a pretty legitimate number. The problem to me with DeMar is that he's been asked in recent years to be basically the best player, arguably the second best player, but I would say the best, on a Chicago team And he's just not that. And there are flaws in roster construction around him, but nowhere is DeMar going to be the best player on a great team. Nowhere is DeMar going to be, in my opinion, the second best overall player on a great team. Now, can he be one of your top 2 scorers and top 2 creators? Absolutely, I think he can be that. And speaking to the Sacramento fit, I mentioned that I've gotten a little bit warmer on this. It's grown on me a little bit. Initially, I probably would have given it like a C to C+. Now I would give it a B to B+, because although I do worry about pairing him with Fox, who improved as a three-point shooter and takes a high volume number of threes, but is just inconsistent there, isn't super efficient, and Sabonis, who is, of course, like a basically zero floor spacer. It does concern me having your 3 best offensive players all with those three-point shooting questions, and it does concern me when all of those guys are basically in the range of mediocrity defensively, and the Kings were a mediocre team defense. Those, to me, are the 2 limitations that you have with this fit, with this quote-unquote big 3. But they didn't give up anything of significance to get him. Getting off of Harrison Barnes is a win. They're paying him a very reasonable contract. And as much as we can rave about the beauty of the Kings offense, all of the handoffs, all of the player movement, the innovation of Mike Brown and what that produced, especially 2 years ago when they were the #1 regular season offense, what have they needed? A second consistent scorer alongside De'Aaron Fox, because Sabonis has just been too limited, too inconsistent in that regard in these playoff environments. I love Malik Monk. Do you want him to be your number 2 from the perimeter full time? It's probably not ideal. And that is where DeMar just brings a ton of juice, And you give him a Domantas Sabonis setting screens, I think he's going to be pretty darn effective. You do give him still overall pretty good spacing. Like when you have Keegan Murray on one wing, you have Kevin Huerter on one wing, they can offset some of the three-point shooting limitations of the Stars because they're so elite and they take such a high number of threes. Like the Kings were one of the highest three-point volume teams this past year with Sabonis at the 5, with Fox taking a lot of threes, but again, not being a guy you consider an elite three-point shooting star. I do think that this boosts them by a few wins. I do think that it raises their offensive ceiling, and I like it because it's not some big investment, and Sacramento really doesn't have a ton of flexibility to improve. So no, it doesn't like totally move the needle, but I do think it makes them better. So I like it from that perspective for Sacramento. And I had a really interesting time thinking about DeMar DeRozan versus Brandon Ingram, because I would think a lot of people will be surprised to have DeMar DeRozan over BI in the year 2024. And again, I think a lot of that is perception, because when you think about the thing that people like to talk about with DeMar DeRozan, it feels like, is the lack of three-point shooting. BI takes just under 4 threes a game this past year, made 35% of them. DeMar took just under 3 threes per game, made 33% of them. Like, of course, there is a difference there in terms of comfort. But I do think, as I said, with BI, people underestimate the weirdness of his lack of volume three-point shooting, the limitations that he does have there. And so then it's like, BI is a slightly better defender. DeMar is a guy who throughout his career, it's like, has never been a positive on-off guy, has never had that sort of like meaningful positive impact on team success by that metric. But as I said, BI is not that guy right now. He's not. His team was better with him off the floor this past year statistically. And then DeMar is a significantly better self-creator because he eats up free throws so much more consistently. He does get to the rim more. I do think he is a better pure mid-range shot maker. I'm going to take that guy. They both have their flaws. Their flaws are more similar, I think, than people would like to admit. But I think that DeMar is going into a better environment now in Sacramento. And I actually think that as a number 3, he's kind of going to thrive.
I don't hate this take, and I agree with you on how much better it's going to make the Kings offense, because you talk about the actions that the Kings run too, right? It's not like DeMar is going from a situation where it's like he is forced to create out of the pick and roll, out of isolation so many times. I think with just all the actions and all the movement and like how much depth there is to the Kings offense, I think he's going to eat. I think he's going to be really successful, and especially when you talk about needing help. Like, Fox really has needed help, man. Domas has not done a great job of expanding his offensive game. He is still just a brute force big, where if he can't big body you, he's probably not hitting any jumpers, man. He's probably not hitting his tough shots. Like, Fox has been, like, so labored just as a number 1. He hasn't had a lot of help. And so in that regard, I do really like it. DeMar Carson was 10th in the NBA in pick and roll points per game. He was 12th in the NBA in isolation points per game. That is really, really valuable to add to this roster. And DeMar, I want to be clear too, it's a tough cut for me. I played with DeMar in between 8 to 11. And then the guys in these archetypes, Middleton, Ingram, and MPJ, it was close between all of these guys. And so I don't hate this take whatsoever. I think it is going to make the Kings better. I don't look at them in any different light as like a real contender or anything like that. But they're a good team out west. They're solid, and they definitely improved. And there's just such a weight lifted off his shoulders where he is just not going to be forced to create for himself every single possession down. Man, he's going to have shots that are manufactured for him a little more easily, and he's going to lift some weight off of Fox's shoulders. So I think it's a good take, man. I'm very fine with him being on your list and him being this high. DeMar is still a very, very good basketball player.
Yeah.
Everybody above him, I think, in this top 6, top 5 range is either better at this job or they have more well-rounded impact, but by no means is this a ridiculous take or DeMar's some scrub right now. DeMar is still a very, very talented basketball player, and yeah, I think the Kings are going to be a lot better offensively next season.
And I think profile is a big part of it, right? DeMar was viewed as damn near one of the league's signature stars for like 10 years, right? I mean, he was the face of some really, really good teams, and he was really fun to watch. And so you have that arc of the eventual disappointment and the hyperfixation on his weaknesses. Whereas it's like Khris Middleton, for example, has just never had that sort of profile individually. And B.I. is still in the early goings of his arc, where it's like, okay, he's only been at an all-star level for a few years. And so when we talk about like, yeah, there's not a lot of spots where I would be dying to take on DeMar DeRozan if I'm trying to win a chip. I don't mean to make this a rag on B.I. Sesh, but I think that applies for more situations for Brandon Ingram as well than a lot of people might realize at this moment, or than a lot of people would like to admit. And also, I just can't imagine DeMar, even though he has not been a good playoff performer throughout his career, ever struggling as much as B.I. did in this run, because he does have more avenues to easy offense. And I do think that DeMar is a fine defender. Like, I don't want to hear people acting as though he's some complete negative there. Like, he has a lot of issues in his game, and I want to be clear. That's why DeMar is at number 7, and I would not have considered him any higher. I think this is as high as you can go with DeMar. But he is an exceptional self-created player offensively, and I just think he has more juice there than anybody below him, and nobody else has the sort of like excellent all-around impact to offset that and push them above him. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I could see people making an argument for DeMar at number 6, because my number 6 is not your conventional star, but I have a feeling that you and I perhaps will be alike on this. I don't know. You seemed confused. Who is in your 6th spot?
Maybe. I'm wondering if I have him one spot higher, the gentleman you were alluding to. In my 6th spot is Jalen Williams of the Oklahoma City Thunder. This last season, Jalen put up 19, 4, and 5 on 54, 43, 81 splits, a true shooting percentage of 62%. You talk about mid-range masters, man, like DeMar DeRozan. I think that applies to this gentleman. And I think J-Dub is in a better situation, obviously, because he doesn't have to be the number 1. He can be the number 2 on some days. He can be the number 3 on some days, depending on how Chet Holmgren is playing. But SGA takes a lot of the shine in Oklahoma City, man. And finally, I think this last season, people finally woke up to the fact that, man, this dude is a stud. This dude is an absolute stud. Like, it's crazy, man. Like, I know we always do this comp, Carson, where we talk about SGA light, but it's true. He really is, man. I think J-Dub is one of the best self-creators in basketball. The change in pace, the shot making off the dribble. I think with his skill set, this guy could climb all the way to 5 or 4 next season. Now, obviously, we have a sour taste in our mouth, like drinking orange juice after you brush your teeth. After what J-Dub did in the final round of the playoffs that we saw, 17 points per game, inefficient. When his team needed him, he kind of disappeared, man. He just collapsed. But it's a guy in his first playoff run. And so I don't hold that massively against him. This is a young guy who is uber talented. He's a great self-creator. He is a great creator out of the pick and roll. He averaged 6.3 pick and roll points per game. That was 25th in the NBA last season. He's an 87th percentile spot-up player. He's an 81st percentile handoff player. And he's pretty damn good in transition. And he's pretty good in isolation too, man. But he is a special shot maker in the mid-range, like I talk about, with the change in pace, the ability to shoot off the dribble. It's it's so much fun to watch, man, and it's really an unstoppable shot when he is on. He shot 51% on step backs, 50% on pull-ups, 49% out of the mid-range, 44% on step back threes. Like, I think that maybe Jalen Williams is barely tapped into, what he could be one day, man. I think maybe J-Dub one day could get up to, 23, 24 points per game, maybe 6 assists a night really efficiently. He's already really close there. He's a really efficient scorer, and he is a damn good number 2. And it all comes traditionally within the flow of the offense. Jalen Williams is not a guy that really is, taking bad shots or taking the offense out of the flow. I really think he's got an awesome game, man. And I think that depending on how he plays next season, I'm serious, I think he could climb to potentially maybe 5 or 4 next season, man. I think you got to have Jalen Williams in the top 10. I would hear an argument for him in the top 5. The kid is a stud, dude. He is a special, special basketball player and one of the best mid-range and pull-up scorers in all of basketball.
I have J-Dub one spot higher than this, and I actually feel pretty strongly that that is exactly where he belongs on this list. I think that there is a big gap between the number 4 and him in my number 5 spot, but I also feel like there is a clear gap between him and my number 6, who I'm going to presume is your number 5, and that is OG Anunoby. And to me, it is just the gap in self-creation where OG, who we'll talk about in a minute, is such an exceptional defender, and I just know that that winning impact is so overwhelming that it's like I would take that with just his really good play finishing offensively, but really very limited self-creation over some of these flawed offensive stars who we're talking about who aren't having high-level impact defensively or whatever. The difference to me is that although J-Dub isn't at this point the pure self-creator that a DeMar DeRozan is, he is a pretty seamless fit offensively anywhere, and he is a legitimately really good defender. He's not OG defensively, but he is really good. And then he is a guy who I do think could be your number 2 option offensively, and you could go far. Now, I was underwhelmed. I was disappointed at times with him in this past playoff run, and I do think there are areas in which he can continue to improve. I would like to see him become a higher volume 3-point shooter because the efficiency is elite, 43%, but the volume is relatively low. I do think that he could get to the line more. Only takes about 3 free throws a night. So again, some of those like most efficient shots on the board, he's not necessarily getting super consistently, but my God, he is so efficient from every individual area on the floor. You mentioned the mid-range stuff. He's well over 40% from deep. He's an elite finisher, 70% in the restricted area, and that's always been his greatest strength as a scorer, I would say. Just his length down there, his body control, his touch, his variety as a finisher. And when you pair that with pretty elite jump shooting, and the fact that he is one of the shiftiest players in the league, like the ability to change gears and just get by you is absurd. You're talking about a nasty basketball player, man. And he was an 89th percentile pick and roll creator, very efficient scorer, also a legitimately good passer. And particularly, I think about some of the lob passing that we did see from him in the playoffs, even as he was struggling as a scorer, the ability to find Chet as a lob target, I thought was really impressive. And he can attack super effectively within the flow. He's an 88th percentile spot up player, great catch and shooter, really good closeout attacker, can read and react as a playmaker. He's got great feel offensively, 71st percentile cutter, uses his athleticism and his finishing skill there as well. Just like the consummate number 2 offensively from the perimeter, and hasn't reached his ceiling, still can improve, still will mature, but I have a lot of confidence he's going to get there. And even the level that he was at last year to me is good enough to have him at number 5 because it was a really, really great regular season. And it's like, yeah, the playoffs were disappointing. He still gave you 19, 7, 5.5 on like almost 55% true shooting with really good defense. And that is the separator to me between him and a lot of these other guys. Guarding Kyrie and Luka, and we know that OKC did an absurd amount of blitzing and sending 2 defenders at those guys, but he guarded them really well. And there were more than a dozen possessions where he guarded them on an island, and he did quite well. Those 2 combined, when he was the primary defender, shot about 43% and had 15 turnovers. And he did a great job on CJ as well. He's long, he's athletic, he's constantly engaged, he's up in your grill, he's quick. So he's just such a good all-around basketball player. And very young, this was just his second year. We saw that youth in the playoffs. But he's already in my 5 spot, and he will only continue to climb higher. And he's a weird guy to lump into any position group, right? Because he plays like a guard, and he was listed as OKC's power forward this past year. I think having him as their 3 in a post-Josh Giddey world, now in a world with Isaiah Hartenstein, that makes sense. So that's why we have him with this group, because he's really a positionless basketball player.
Yeah, I don't hate the fact that he's here. I debated between who should be higher, OG or Jalen Williams. There obviously is a clear offensive gap between these two in terms of self-creation, ball handling, stuff like that. But OG is just such a great ceiling raiser in what he can do as like a number 3. The Knicks, down the stretch of the regular season after acquiring him, were 20-3. You know, they were 16.4 points per 100 possessions better defensively with him on the floor. That was the difference between a defensive rating of 101.8, which is just ridiculous in 2024, and a defensive rating of 118.2. And so I think you're getting one of the best wing defenders on planet Earth in OG Anunoby, and you're getting an elite floor spacer at this point in his career. He shot 40% off the catch last season on nearly 5 attempts per game, and in the playoff run, shot 42% from deep. He was the best transition scorer in all of the playoffs during the run. He's always been a really good transition guy, and in the half court too, I like what he brings. You saw some games where he had to take on more responsibility as a creator. Really strong going to the rack, a good screener, good cutter, good touch. Again, I think there is a clear offensive gap in terms of self-creation between these two, but I think OG is one of the best defenders on planet Earth from the wing spot, and does a lot of other stuff in the aggregate that I really value, man. Defensive playmaking, floor spacing, shooting, off-ball scoring, transition stuff. So I prefer that right now because I just think OG is a complete player. But like I said, man, this was tough between these two, and I can definitely see this is probably the ceiling for OG just because of his limitations. I can see J-Dub climbing even higher than this.
Yeah, I think that people might be surprised that I even have OG at number 6. I don't know. We'll see what the reaction is. But just because everybody below him on my list is a significantly better self-creator. But again, all of them also have their flaws in terms of winning impact. DeMar DeRozan is a guy who year after year, it's like, yeah, if you look at the on-off stuff, his team is not better with him on the floor. BI, you have those same questions. Scottie, you just have the inefficiency offensively, him not being at his ceiling defensively. Khris Middleton, you have the inconsistency that comes with his game offensively and the lack of high impact elsewhere. With OG, I know that he is probably going to make about 40% of his threes, that he is going to consistently play well within the flow of the offense, that he will find his spots to use his strength as a driver, to get to the mid-range where he is really excellent. Just enough. Give me just enough there, and then he is going to wreck the game defensively. And I do want to appreciate the guys who have those sort of special skill sets. I had Alex Caruso in my top 10 shooting guards. He's only going to give you 10 points per game, but he's going to play an efficient, versatile role offensively, and he is the best guard defender on planet Earth. OG, to me, is the best forward defender on planet Earth. You have your centers who have their different level of impact, but when it comes to wings and forwards, OG is the best doing it in the game right now. You mentioned how ridiculously dominant they were after trading for him. They were 22 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor, and he just completely transforms the game on that end. The Knicks had a defensive rating under 102 with him on the floor, and he is elite at damn near every trait defensively, right? Elite size at 6'7", elite strength and length, and then he has phenomenal hands, right? He's always been a steals monster. He has excellent instincts positionally, making plays on the ball. He has impressive agility and the defensive range that this guy covers in terms of his on-ball assignments. He's an excellent on and off-ball defender, but if you think about the Philly series, which was an absolute war, there was a strong case to be made that he was your best maxi defender at 6'7", 230, guarding little, shifty Tyrese Maxey. He definitely was out of your starters. Now, Deuce McBride did an awesome job, and he was able to take on that matchup really effectively. But OG was clearly top 2 in that regard, and with some help, he could legitimately guard Joel Embiid. Now, you're probably going to have to send some doubles, but he could wall him off for long enough to make that an effective defensive strategy. For example, when I think it was the game Robinson got hurt, and then Hartenstein was in a bunch of foul trouble, and they went to OG on Embiid for most of the fourth, and that actually was effective. Those two combined shot 35% when guarded by OG Anunoby. So there is just unreal versatility there with him on the defensive side of the ball, and he's massive. I love that sort of size being brought to the table. And then, as I mentioned, awesome three-point shooter, going to be 38 to 40%, 47% from mid-range. I just prefer that. I prefer that sort of awesome winning impact that I can bank on night after night, as opposed to, okay, how do I fit DeMar DeRozan in here? Can I get him to commit defensively? He'll be passable there. Same goes for a Brandon Ingram. And when I look at the Knicks, I think OG is their second best player. I do. Julius Randle provides a ceiling there that OG cannot compete with offensively. But Julius Randle has a whole lot of flaws. Mikal Bridges and OG are in a pretty darn similar mold, but I do consider OG the more game-breaking defender of the two of them. I think he's better as an interior defender. I think he is more versatile from all the way small guards to big, strong power forwards. And then offensively, I think that they're pretty darn close. I mean, Mikal has a little bit more juice, I guess, but I really do like OG's strength, and I really do trust his perimeter shot. And as a number two, in this very specific situation where you could argue that Mikal Bridges is the second best player, you could argue Julius Randle is the second best player, like clearly that is not a normal basketball situation, but I do think the Knicks can win the title like that. So, I do love the winning impact from him. Again, I think that J-Dub is too well-rounded with the sort of offensive ceiling that OG just cannot possibly match for me to have him above him. And like if you dropped OG into OKC, they would need more offensive creation. New York is sort of a unique situation where you have Brunson who can carry such a ridiculous load. You do have a number two like Julius Randle, and then it's like, all right, our depth is insane. Our defense could be insane. Let's just let OG do his thing and excel in his role. But he would have a massive winning impact in a lot of situations, every situation.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I mean, I don't know if there's a team you could name where OG just doesn't drop in and fit like a glove and help you win basketball games.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about OG. I agree with you, too. I think he is the Knicks' second best player. Bridges is really talented. I think there's a little bit of a self-creation gap between those two, but it's not enough to offset the fact that, yeah, OG is just disruptive defensively. He's one of the most disruptive guys in all of basketball. And, like, that ability to just make plays, to get stops, and to immediately turn that defense into offense, OG's one of the best in the game at that.
Mm-hmm. And it's very close. I don't want to disrespect Julius Randle either, because it's like OG could never give you 25, 10, and 5 on decent efficiency, which Julius Randle is totally capable of doing. And they need that. They need all of these guys in the aggregate to live up to their potential. That's why I want to be clear. It's a very unique situation. OG could not be the second best player on a title team in basically any other situation in the league. And even if he is their second best player, it is by a very slim margin. But I do think that he absolutely deserves respect far beyond what the box score would say. I mean, you just look at how completely he transformed the Knicks season, and that to me speaks to his winning impact, why he is a player who every single basketball team in the league would want desperately. But there's a big old gap to me between the 5 spot once we get to these top 4, and I'm interested, Logan, in how you do rank these top 4. Who's in your 4 spot?
In my 4 spot is a guy that I think has strangely become underrated after these playoffs, and that's Paul George. Paul George in this in this last season averaged 23, 5, and 4 on 47, 41, 91 split, 61% true shooting. I just think it's his role. I think the fact that he's playing second fiddle here in LA, and with Kawhi's injuries and inconsistently being on the floor, I think a lot of people took this as, oh, Paul George is the de facto leader here. We need him to step up and lead this team to, what, a conference finals? Come on, man. The Clippers weren't doing that not at full health. Like, that is just the most important thing I think you have to emphasize with Paul George, is just what is expected of him and what was expected of him post-Kawhi injury, right? Like, his role just completely flipped on its head from being a supporting member to being the lead guy. Paul George at this stage in his career is not equipped to be the lead guy. We saw what happened when Paul George was the lead guy. He went to the Eastern Conference Finals. He took the Heatles to 7 games, right? That was Paul George when he was equipped to do something like that. He's just older. You know, that's just what happens. He doesn't create the same rim pressure. He's not the same athlete he once was. That being said, he is still a damn good basketball player. And in the new role that he's going to have as the number 3 in Philadelphia, it's like a glove. I think it is a perfect fit, man. And Paul George is still an uber talented player and has grown in a lot of the areas where he was deficient, right? He has grown as a ball handler, as a playmaker, as a decision maker. And frankly, he is just one of the best spot-up guys in all of basketball. He shot 45% off the catch last season on just over 4 attempts a night. He was a 94th percentile spot-up guy, and he's still a damn good scorer on ball. He was a 95th percentile scorer out of the pick and roll. He was the 13th best volume scorer out of isolation in basketball last season, and the Clippers were 14 points per 100 possessions better overall with him on the floor than off. And he's still a damn good defender. Like, you are getting an elite shooter of the basketball. You were getting a damn good creator and playmaker. You were getting a good defender. And he's going to be your third guy this season. I just think that's the context that you have to present this with, man. Paul George is your lead guy, is not going to carry you to the promised land. But as a supporting character, as a number 2 or a number 3, he's one of the best guys you could ask for in all of basketball. One of the best spot-up players. Still a damn good scorer on ball. I just think people let that first-round series kind of cloud their vision of what Paul George still is at this point in his career, Carson. I think people got way, way too low on Paul George after this playoff run.
I agree, dude. And I legitimately debating having PG at number 3, which probably would upset a lot of people. But I really, really like PG, man. I think that in a lot of ways, he had a career season this past year. It was career best efficiency, 61% true shooting. His impact stats, I mean, plus 14.5 on off. The Clippers were a +9 team in terms of net rating. Like, they were elite with him on the floor, and they were not good with him off the floor. Like, he had a big winning impact throughout this regular season. And the efficiency, I mean, you mentioned, as a pure shooter, it's ridiculous. Over 66% effective field goal percentage on catch and shoot jumpers is, like, almost unthinkable. 94th percentile spot-up player. But what that jump shooting did for his self-creation as well is outstanding. 90th percentile pick and roll creator, 80th percentile isolation creator, 84th percentile post-up creator. Like, he is one of the premier off-ball superstars in basketball. I'm just going to take that again. I don't want to say superstar. 90th percentile pick and roll creator, 80th percentile isolation creator, 84th percentile post-up creator. He is one of the premier off-ball players in basketball, and he still brings you real star-level on-ball creation, and he is still a plus versatile defender, but he is certainly best suited to be a number 3 at this stage in his career. Like, he is the dream number 3 anywhere, dude. Gonna kill it away from the ball as a pure shooter, gonna defend at a high level, and when you need it, he can step up in an on-ball role. But if you're gonna ask him to consistently be one of your 2 guys, that's where I think you're gonna run into issues and frustrations, and that's what we've seen. And that's not to judge PG too much off of the 6-game sample size that we got in this Dallas series, because we haven't actually seen him in the playoffs in a few years because of all of the injuries, all of the Clippers' misfortune. And last time we did before this was 2021, when he was a different basketball player, and he had the best playoff run of his career, but he was a different basketball player at that point. The thing with him at this stage is just that he's not getting to the rim, and he's not getting to the line at nearly the rate that he used to. And it's often been a bit of a frustration with PG that, like, he can fall in love with the beauty of his jump shot, but at this stage in his career, it is more pronounced than ever that he's very reliant on those shots, and it also makes more sense. He's just not quite the same athlete that he used to be. So that's why I have him here. I think that at this point, he is a dream number 3, but the guy who I have in my 3 spot just showed us that he is more capable of consistently asserting himself, of hitting that level night after night that you need from a number 2. Whereas even though I think that PG fits anywhere offensively and is going to have a real winning impact, you're just not quite sure if he can night after night live up to that sort of billing for a team that wants to win the title.
Yeah, I assume the guy that you're talking about at number 3 is Jaylen Brown, and it is correct. That downhill pressure. That's the difference, right? The athletic advantages that he just has at this point, the physical imposition. Mm-hmm. He can just do that in a way that PG can't at this way in his career. And I don't blame you for saying this is an argument. Like, when you look into the advanced numbers, like the fact that the Clippers were 14 points better with PG on the floor overall. The Celtics were nearly 9 points worse per 100 possessions worse with JB on the floor. I think that speaks to how great this team is top to bottom and how great their bench was. The Celtics were also 12-0 without Jaylen Brown in the regular season. So I can completely understand why it would be an argument, but I agree with you. I think that with how consistent Jaylen Brown was at just working downhill, man, you couldn't stop the guy. Like, if he wanted to get downhill, get out the way, man. The train is on the tracks, and he's going to go get his bucket. Jaylen Brown was number 2 in transition points per game in the entire league this last season. And while I think he may have his half-court limitations in terms of pull-up jump shooting or jump shooting overall, PG's advantages there don't outweigh how great Jaylen Brown can be. Again, weaponizing his athleticism and physical traits. Is he going to have a bad game or two? Sure. But PG is going to have that and missing his jump shots too, right? So PG's jump shot advantage just does not outweigh the athletic advantages that Jaylen Brown has at this point in his career. And I would argue that Jaylen Brown's probably the better defender at this point in their careers, just again with his strength, his athleticism, his speed. I mean, he took on Luka in the NBA Finals and did a really damn good job. More than anything, I'm wondering if Jaylen Brown can climb higher on this list and how soon that is going to happen. There's the two guys at the top of this list are at a completely different trajectory than Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown is on the roller coaster, and he's about to hit the peak. The other two guys are definitely on the descent of the mountain in comparison. So I'm just wondering when, and not if, Jaylen Brown surpasses these other two guys and can climb into the top 2. But right now, I think the 3 spot is just right for Jaylen Brown.
I agree, but I do think there are some people who will push for him as number 2.
100%. I would... Number 1's tough. No, we'll get into that when the time comes. But...
if anybody argued him for number 1, I would spit on them, and I would do a jig above them and call them a fool. But maybe, and if you are that person, let me know, and I can spit on you and do a jig above you, because I think that would be crazy. And that's kind of what happens sometimes, right? You win a title, and then everybody benefits from that winning bias, when in reality, it's like, hey, you're a sum of your parts. As we know, there's a lot of great Boston Celtics players, but not every single one of them is better than we previously thought because they won the title. Maybe it's just, all of those guys are really good, but Drew Holiday doesn't go from, the 13th best point guard to the 8th best. Jaylen Brown doesn't go from the 3rd best to the best, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think a lot of people would argue him as the best, though. I think Jaylen is nice and cozy in this 3 spot. Just went 24-6-3 on 59% true shooting in a title run, and it was very, very impressive. Pretty much end to end, he was their most consistent scorer. I don't think that that's really arguable. And he is quite a versatile offensive player. You mentioned one of the best guys in transition in the league, insane athlete in the full court. And his archetype, being that sort of big physical wing, it's a commonality between the top 3 guys, actually. The ability to assert yourself physically in these environments, to get to your spot and then to shoot over the top of people. It's really valuable, and it's something that you can bank on. And he absolutely has that going for him. You mentioned some of the jump shooting inconsistency. He's a pretty good spot-up player. He's 35% from beyond the arc. But where he's really good as a jump shooter is inside the arc. It's that intermediate range. He shot 52% inside the paint, but outside the restricted area, which is excellent, and that encompasses a lot of those short jumpers, and 44% for mid-range, which is a really good number. And that was a huge part of his shot diet throughout the playoffs, right? Take the bump, assert yourself physically, and get to those 15-footers. It's a really, really important shot to have in the playoffs. So he can do basically everything at a pretty good level in terms of scoring offensively. Knock down catch-and-shoot jumpers, attack closeouts, really good driver, good intermediate shot maker, 70th percentile post-up score, 61st percentile isolation, right around 70th pick-and-roll score. The issues with Jaylen, the reasons that I don't think you'd make a strong case for him in the top 2 is basically about his ability to float on offense. Like, if he were not in this situation where it's a sort of drive and kick utopia, right? And he can beat his men off the bounce consistently and then just make a sort of simple read, and then the guy who he finds is either going to knock down 40+% of his catch and shoot threes, or he will make a smart swing pass and then somebody else will attack, right? And everybody in that offense is very connected and smart and skilled. if you were asking him to, run 10 pick and roll possessions per game to consistently be like the guy making skip passes, hitting lobs, whatever, like we know that Jaylen Brown cannot do that. And his scoring efficiency is pretty consistently going to be in that average range. He was 58% true shooting in the regular season. Again, doesn't get a bunch of the super easy stuff in terms of eating up free throws or being a great volume three-point shooter. He does get to the rim, but he doesn't have those other avenues to seamless efficiency. But versus PG, I do just think there's a different level of physical imposition. There's a different level of assertiveness that just makes me more confident in him night after night. And the level he defended at, as you mentioned, was really impressive. So PG might be a more seamless fit anywhere you go. But Jaylen just went out there and he was awesome as a number 2 for an entire playoff run and was conference finals MVP and was finals MVP. Whether you agree or disagree with that, like that speaks to the caliber that he was at as a player. I do think that he has earned the edge in this conversation because of that. And I really think that he improved this past year. I've always loved Jaylen because he is a Cal Bear, and there's not a lot of good Cal Bears in the NBA. I had season tickets when he was at Cal. I watched him play a lot. But I haven't always been the highest on his impact because of the playmaking limitations, because of the average scoring efficiency. But with how he's progressed defensively, with how he's progressed as a ball handler, with the fact that I do think he's progressed a bit as a playmaker. He is still definitely below average when it comes to stars there, but I do think that he progressed this past year. He has become a better all-around basketball player, and I think that he utilized his strength more effectively in this run than he ever has in the playoffs. So it's a lot of marginal improvements that amount to a meaningful improvement, and I do think that he belongs in this 3 spot.
Yeah, I mean, he's super impactful, and I say it's not a question of, it's if not when it comes to these top 2 guys. And the reason I say that, and also the reason that I say that I would hear an argument for Jaylen Brown at number 2 or number 1 is their trajectory aspect. Like, with both of these guys in the top 2 spots, I think it's a concern of availability, of, how much longer can they stay at this level? At number 2, I have Jimmy Butler. He's missed 18 games in at least 18 games in each of the last 5 seasons. Wasn't available for this playoff run. Is going to be 35 years old at the beginning of next season. I just wonder how much longer he can stay at this level. You know what I mean? I've been a huge Jimmy guy, dude. And the Jimmy experience has been awesome over the last 5 years in terms of the rising that we've seen this guy reach in the playoffs, the freak competitiveness, man, that just seems to propel Jimmy into these best player in the world conversations. The Heat's voodoo magic at any given time to just steal basketball games. And Jimmy's complete well-rounded impact. It's just, I just wonder how much long. It's Father Time is undefeated. The only guy who beat Father Time, Carson, to me, is Tom Brady. That guy whooped Father Time's ass. I just don't know if anybody else is really well equipped to defeat it. And so,
Bro does not acknowledge LeBron James.
LeBron also beat Father Time. Those are the 2 anomalies, I think, in history.
Bro does not acknowledge Novak Djokovic.
How old is Novak?
37.
Novak. We'll see. I don't know. Brady and LeBron are different kinds of longevity, man. Freakish. Eat your veggies, kids. Get your TB12, man. Get your hyperbaric chamber, whatever LeBron does, man.
Yeah.
But it's a real concern of mine. You know what I mean? I've loved Jimmy. Jimmy's one of my favorite guys in the league. His competitiveness, the dog aspect, how he talks his shit. I don't know how you can't like Jimmy, man. He's really fun. But when he's out there, he's great. The same thing goes for Kawhi, who's in my 1 spot. I'll go ahead and I'll spoil it. Like, both of these guys just have their availability concerns. But I just don't think there's enough from JB to put him above these guys who have been definitive number 1s. They have propelled these teams to be great in the regular season, both of them, Jimmy and Kawhi. Jimmy has propelled them to be even better consistently in the playoffs as their number 1. This last season, Jimmy put up 21, 5, and 5 on 50, 41, 86 splits, 63% true shooting. And when you're talking about 2A impact, Jimmy is at, towards the top of the list. The Heat were 8 points per 100 possessions better with Jimmy on the floor. And he's a damn good engine. You don't see it in the regular season. This is more of a playoff impact when you see Jimmy get up to 25, 8, and 8 a night really efficiently. But it is the 2A impact. It is the fact that Jimmy offensively in comparison to Jaylen Brown can weaponize his physicality, can get downhill, is a great finisher. but also is just a beast out of the mid-range. When he needs to, can just get to any spot he wants on the floor and kill you from there. This last season, he wasn't that great, just 35% out of the mid-range, but again, consistently in the playoffs when it's mattered, we've seen him reach that level. We've also seen him reach a really high level as a playmaker, as a rebounder. I know that playoff Jimmy gets conflated, Carson, but it's real. You know, he just cranks it up another notch when you need him to and can be that great. But I just wonder how much longer it's going to be. And there were some alarm bells, Carson, that rang inside my head when you hear the rumors of Miami potentially trading him. I know his contract is up at the end of next season, so maybe you want to move him and get some assets before he decides to leave. Maybe there's a rift in the relationship there in Miami between him and a Pat Riley or the front office. So that did raise some alarm bells in my head, like wondering why Miami would be so interested in moving off of Jimmy, but there's just not enough of a resume there. I know Jaylen Brown just won Finals MVP. I know he was great, but that team is so great.
Yeah.
There's just not enough of a sample size or of Jaylen Brown being a number one for me to put him above him yet. Can it happen next season? Definitely. I could see Jaylen Brown climbing this list by the end of next year. Like, the guy is just a monster, and he seems like he's going to continue to get better. And the two guys above him are, you know, slowly fading away, it seems. So I can see Brown climbing higher on this list, but just not right now. I think Jimmy is stamped as the number 2 small forward in basketball.
Yeah, I still think that there's a gap between him and Jaylen Brown, and I think some people may disagree with that, but to me, I think that that's a combination of winning bias and recency bias because we didn't see Jimmy healthy in these playoffs. There's just a completely different level of capability as a number 1, and it's a combination of efficiency. It's a combination of playmaking. I still prefer Jimmy in the playoffs to Jaylen. I think that they're both high-level defenders, but I think that Jimmy, the combination of instincts as an off-ball defender, his playmaking there, his strength, his athletic attributes, like he is one of the best defensive wings that we've seen in this league over the last decade plus. And then over his last 2 postseasons, Logan, combined 2 deep playoff runs to Game 7 of the conference finals and the finals, 27 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists tonight on 58% true shooting. And yes, I do think that people, and when I say people, I mean you, because you talk about taking Jimmy Butler over Joel Embiid and stuff like that, can inflate the myth of playoff Jimmy and can act like that's what he's done every single playoff run throughout his career, when that is not the case. But he does have attributes that, to me, clearly do scale. And the biggest part of that is just the pace that he plays with, the fact that he is never sped up as an operator, and that sort of absurd strength in mid-range shot making. But it's the maturity, it's the playmaking that definitely sets him apart from Jaylen Brown, in my opinion. The ability to take just a group of capable spot-up shooters and a Bam Adebayo, of course, and say, all right, let's go. We're going to just get to the necessary level offensively to where we can grind out multiple playoff series. I just don't think that Jaylen can do that as a number 1. I think that he is a beneficiary of the aggregate playmaking, the ridiculous aggregate offensive skill in Boston when it comes to being able to win a title in circumstances like that. And, of course, being pretty clearly his team's second best player behind Jason Tatum. I do think that there is a pretty clear gap between the two of them still in terms of overall impact. So I still think Jimmy is a much stronger number 1. I do think that he is pretty clearly above Jaylen to me. I did not see nearly enough of a drop-off this year to change my position on that. But at number 1, Logan, and you mentioned having concerns about these guys and what's up next for them. I'm not factoring that in. To me, these are who are the best guys. What have we seen, right? I mean, if we were projecting, then I could say, hey, I think Franz Wagner's going to become a 40% three-point shooter. He's my number 1 small forward. I'm not doing it that way.
Well, if people want to get their pitchforks out and get ready, this is a serious thing that I thought. This is not hyperbolic. I really considered completely leaving Kawhi off my list because I really wonder if Kawhi Leonard is ever going to play. I really wonder if he's ever going to play meaningful basketball ever again in his life, Carson. Like, I don't say that.
Okay, are you factoring in availability to your list?
No, I did not. I did not. When Kawhi is healthy, he is one of the best players on planet Earth. That's been known. It's the same thing as Joel Embiid. When he's available and when he's fully healthy, he is one of the best players on planet Earth. So, no, I didn't factor that in. But I did think, this guy's knees are shot, man. to expect Kawhi Leonard at this stage in his career to make it through a full season and not even playing all 82 games with doing Kawhi Leonard load management throughout the year, to expect him to be available at the end of the year and ready to go for the playoffs is unlikely. I just think that is a fact. I don't even think it's like arguable that you would expect Kawhi to be available for the playoffs. And it's a damn shame, man, because it completely gutted the Clippers. It ruined this era of Clippers basketball. It ruined all of the assets they have for the future because they thought they had something ready to go, and it sucks. But it's just a reality. Like, I seriously wonder if Kawhi Leonard is ever going to play meaningful basketball again, and that scares me because Kawhi is so damn good when he is out there, man. The level of impact that he can have on the game is damn near unrivaled, dude. He is so efficient across every single play type you can imagine, man. He is such an elite scorer of the basketball from everywhere on the court. And the ease and effortlessness that Kawhi can just get to his spots with his strength. Just give him a screen. Just give him a handoff. Just give him a spot-up opportunity. Kawhi is going to get to where he needs to go and do his thing. It's just the availability, man. It's disheartening. Kawhi is a hero of some sort of. I mean, like the level that we saw him reach in 2019, man. He superhuman.
Yeah.
It's like you said with Paul George. It is a fundamentally different basketball player than he once was. He is not athletic. He is not as physical. He is not as strong. He is not as imposing.
No, he is. No, he is absolutely as strong and as physical.
Well, I mean in terms of like downhill pressure. Like, I don't think Kawhi can pressure the rim quite at the level that he was at in those Toronto days and how he was 5 years ago. That's what I mean. Like, he still has those traits, but he can't weaponize them in the same way just because I don't think his body can take that kind of physical toll that it once did. But he is still an elite jump shooter, one of the best in basketball. He's one of the best off-the-dribble shooters in basketball. And again, he just gets to his spots with ease. When Kawhi is on the court, he's one of the best in the world. And so that's why I had to have him number one. I debated last night. I was thinking, do I just bite the bullet? Do I leave him completely off the list because I don't think Kawhi's ever going to be fully healthy for a playoff run again? I can't do that. I can't justify that in my mind because his talent level is not that. His talent level is the best small forward in basketball. And so I'll respect Kawhi and I'll put him here because I know how great he is when he's available. But in my heart of hearts, I just feel like we're never going to see Kawhi play meaningful basketball again.
Bummer. But yeah, listen, I think that you're absolutely right. It is not reasonable to expect ever that Kawhi is going to complete a season fully healthy. I mean, we are talking about 4 straight years, Logan, where he either barely plays in the playoffs, he's not available for the playoffs at all, or 2021, he's doing his thing, and then he gets hurt midway through that Jazz series. Like, it sucks. It sucks. But what I don't want to do is understate the greatness of Kawhi when he is healthy. And what I really dislike that people are doing is this whole, like, let's have the conversation about Kawhi. Because he dropped out of the Olympics, right? And I think we can all presume that that is due to injury concerns. And people are like, ooh, we got to have a conversation about Kawhi. What conversation, man? What doubt has he left in his basketball resume when healthy and on the floor? 2019, he had one of the great individual runs that we have seen in recent years in this league. He clearly played at the level of a top 3 dude on the planet. Throughout the Clippers years, he has played every single time like a top 10, I would say like a top 8 basketball player on the planet. He's gotten hurt. I cannot think of a single factor that I fault a player for less in the outcome of their career than injuries, man. Injuries suck. Nobody wants to get hurt. It's unfortunate, and it is completely out of his control. He has consistently played as one of the best dudes on the planet. So when we are ranking the best dudes on the planet, Kawhi is in my top 10. When we are ranking the best dudes at this position, Kawhi is my number 1. This year, still gave you 24, 6, and 4 on 63% true shooting. Was a 94th percentile isolation score, 87th percentile pick and roll score, 71st percentile post score. You cannot stop him because of the combination of strength, physicality, and size, and unbelievable jump shooting. Like, from the mid-range and from those short-range jumpers, he's unreal. He was 56% in the paint outside the restricted area, which is second only to Nikola Jokic out of all of the high-volume players in the league. And there's a gap between Kawhi and basically everybody else. I think Luka's actually pretty close to him in the 3 spot, but that's insane. 43% on catch and shoot threes, 39% on pull-up threes. Like, these shots for him are absurdly efficient. And he is still a fantastic perimeter defender. The impact numbers are crazy. He had a plus 12 on-off number this past year. The Clippers were a plus 8.5 net rating team with him on the floor. And over all of his Clippers years, he has a plus 11 on-off number. They are a plus 10 net rating team with him on the floor. Over all the Clippers years, when he's out there, they win 67% of their games. That's an elite pace. Without him, they're under 49%. They're a mediocre basketball team. So that's where I'm just like, respect Kawhi, man. And this playoff run was obviously super disappointing. He played 2 games. He looked nothing like himself. He was clearly not even close to right in terms of health. But if you take that out, and if you look at the 2019 to 2023 playoff runs in which he was healthy, he averaged 39 and 4.5 on 63% true shooting. Like, year after year after year, he continues to rise to this absurd level when he ups his load if he can stay healthy. And I get it. It's unlikely that he stays healthy. But when he is absolutely unconscious. And that's how I'm ranking these dudes in a vacuum, presuming health. How do they perform, particularly in the playoffs? When I think that your mettle as a basketball player is tested most, Kawhi has aced that test time after time after time, as well as anybody in this generation of basketball players. I think that he is a phenomenal assassin, and I really don't think he's regressed that much from 2019. Like, do I think he's lost a little bit of a step in his ability to pressure the rim? I do, but he's continued to progress as a playmaker. I think he's lost a little bit of a step defensively as well, but he's still really good there. The dude's a dominant basketball player, and it sucks that we don't get to see him healthy in the playoffs, because who knows what we would think of this Clippers era, and now PG is gone. And now it's the James Harden and Kawhi experiment, and even if Kawhi is healthy, I don't trust Harden enough as a number 2. But you know what? Kawhi plays, they're still going to be a damn good playoff team. He is that sort of dominant basketball player.
Yeah, and I mean, just a year ago, Carson, against Phoenix, he dropped 240 pieces in the games that he was healthy in? Like,
yeah,
it wasn't
like
that
35 over those 2 games. Soundly outplayed KD. Soundly outplayed Devin Booker.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we have to look back to find when Kawhi was dominating like that. And
it was this year. He had an amazing regular season.
Yeah. And
the Clippers were a dominant regular season team with him on the floor.
The jump shooting is something that you can't take away too, man. I saw somebody on Twitter the other day debating like who had the prettiest jump shot they had ever seen. Kawhi's up there.
That was our boy Drew. That was Drew from
Pick
a Side.
Yeah, Drew said he liked Melo. Melo's a great pick. I think Kawhi's up there for me too, though, dude, in terms of just like
the efficiency of
efficiency. Yeah, and just beauty of it, man. It's up there. I want to ask you this. So eventually, I know that we're going to do our top 10 players in the league. Are you going to factor health and availability in that at all, or does that have really no bearing on your player rankings?
I don't factor it in. Like when we did our top 10 players before the playoffs, I had Kawhi at number 7 on that list. And I think that based on the caliber that he is at, I think that that's about right.
What about physical exertion? Does that, and this is more specific to something we're going to do soon, like LeBron as an example, does that factor into you at all?
Well, LeBron doesn't necessarily assert himself at the volume that you would like from a number 1 throughout the course of a run. I get that. So like that you can argue as something that slightly diminishes these guys, right? If you just don't think that they can fully put forth the necessary volume, right? If they have to pick their spots, I think that maybe that is something that slightly dings both Kawhi and LeBron. But Logan, like you heard those numbers, right? When Kawhi is out there in the playoffs, he gives you 30 a night on crazy efficiency, right? It's not like he's holding back. It's just when he's hurt, he's hurt.
And you know what, man? That's a great point too, Carson, because I am looking this through a bit of a pessimistic lens. Optimistically, I mean, he could flip all of these Kawhi haters. And again, this is so far from the expectation. We just need one more. If we can get one more, man, and it sucks because we didn't get any of that with PG. That's what makes this sting so much more is we didn't even get one healthy run.
No, we got one. We got one, and they choked against the Nuggets.
And then
that's it, out of 5 years.
It sucks, man. If we can get one more, man, or just another series, dude, that sucks. That's where the bar is moved. It has moved from, can we get a conference finals run? Can we get a series out of Kawhi? You're right, though. I have the utmost confidence that if Kawhi was healthy and if he could give you 6, 7 games in a series, man, you would see it. And I don't think he'd disappoint. And that's why he's stamped. That's why I don't really think you can argue anybody else. His impact when he is available and on the court, it surpasses every other small forward. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's particularly close. You talk about the gap between like 4 and 5. I think there's a massive gap between 1 and 2. It's Kawhi and everybody else, man.
Yeah. I mean, there's one superstar on this list. There's one top 10 guy on this list. There's one dude who it's like, if you're healthy, he's your number one. You have the right dudes around him. Absolutely, you can win the title. That's Kawhi. He's the only dude on this list to me who has that sort of status. And some people may be wondering, oh, where are some other guys who have been considered great small forwards throughout their careers? I'll tip you off. They're going to be on the power forward list because that's the position that they effectively play at this stage in his career. I guess you could argue that Kawhi is a power forward too, but he feels like a 3 to me. And you know what? It's good for him. He gets to be king of this castle. Congratulations, Kawhi. You are the number one small forward. Any final thoughts on the list before we get out of here, Logan?
Yeah, so as we have done for our previous top 10 episodes on positions, I've asked 2 closeout questions. Who do you think is most likely to climb onto this list that is not currently on your list? And who do you think is the most likely to completely fall off of this list?
Excellent question, Logan. It excites me every time. It just sends a tingling sensation throughout my body. I think that most likely to join is definitely my boy Brandon Miller. I think that there's just so
over
much
Franz
game. Who's most likely to join this list? I mean, next year. That's what we're doing next year.
I like the Brandon Miller take. I'm a big Brandon Miller guy, but yeah.
Well, if we're just thinking next year, then I wouldn't say that it's easily Brandon Miller, but I do think there's a real chance that it is Brandon Miller. I mean, the shot making is absolutely ridiculous. He was already so productive as a rookie. The defensive tools are all there to be tapped into. He is the guy who is not currently on this list who has clearly the highest ceiling. I do think he'll be a better player than Franz. Specifically for next year, I do think it's Franz because honestly, even compared to like a Scottie Barnes, I mean, I get that, Scottie was capable of carrying more volume this year. He was more productive, but there is a seamlessness of the fit with Franz when he is shooting 36 to 38% from deep. Just the versatility of that impact, the fact that he does have that sort of touch shot making inside the arc, that sort of pick and roll poise, like I like that guy a lot. Just comparing them because they're both in that 2021 draft. The Franz shot bounce back will be big, and it will probably put him in the top 10 of this list, and he'll probably just knock Khris Middleton off because there's no way for Khris Middleton to get any better at this stage in his career.
Those are my 2 picks as well, and it sucks because I really love watching. Khris Middleton's one of my favorite guys to just watch in the league. He's got a pretty game. Yeah. But it's definitely him. Like, even other guys, like, I can see with a good season too, like maybe DeMar climbing on this list. Like if MPJ has a down year, DeMar is a good one. I can see him propelling himself, but there's nobody else that I can see. Like even if Kawhi and Jimmy had down years, Khris Middleton's probably the obvious answer if we see some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, because dude, it was an unconscious run. That's what I want to emphasize about Khris Middleton. Like, dude, 59% out of the mid range. This level of tough shot making is just really hard to sustain, even though he is a phenomenal tough shot maker. That kind of level, again, it ekes him onto this list. We're likely to see a regression to the means with Middleton.
Yeah, I mean, he's a pretty nasty shot maker, but as we've talked about, he is very, very, very reliant on that. So I think there's a couple of pretty clear candidates to join this list, and Middleton to me does stand out as the guy who would be most likely to leave it. And I mean, you're talking about Kawhi, Jimmy, right? They're not going to fall off like that. I mean, I think Kawhi's a top 8 player. I think Khris Middleton is like 50-something because this isn't the strongest position group. I don't know. I don't have it mapped out all the way that far, but I would guess he's somewhere in the 50s for me. There's a big, big gap there. All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for us here today. Hope you enjoyed. Ranking stuff is oh so much fun, and we will be doing more of it. So we just had ourselves quite the weekend, didn't we, Logan? We were in New York. We competed in the BDGE trivia competition. That was a blast. Hopefully they put out some video from that you guys will all be able to watch on YouTube. I don't know. I can't make any promises. It's not my domain. But spoiler alert, we didn't win. We didn't win. Boo! Throw tomatoes at us. Draw and quarter us. Flog us in the town square. We didn't win, But did we have a whole lot of fun, Logan?
Yeah, well, real quick, I just wanted to say, dude, that's literally, legitimately, it's like the most fun I've had in a long time, man. That was an awesome event.
Yes.
A ton of production quality and value went into it. Nick,
Yes.
all the BDG boys, you could tell a lot of heart and soul went into it. A lot of work, and the production quality was insane to me. Like, just big shout out to the BDG guys for hosting us. Big shout out to all the creators that came out. It was a fucking blast, man. It was a really damn good time. And if we run it back, we're coming for next, man. We coming for next, Carson.
We are. You guys maybe will see how we lose. I'm not going to spoiler it in case the video does come out. It may break your hearts. It broke ours. But we will be back with a vengeance. And it was an absolutely great time. And particularly shout out to Drew and shout out to Riv for Pick a Side. We needed to pick up 2 dudes for our team. They came on. It was an absolute delight getting to hang out with them and meet them in person and compete with them. And you guys will be seeing some of them on our show pretty soon. Also, shout out to everybody who came out to that event. Shout out to all the fans who were there in person. Shout out to anybody who we met, took a picture with, talked with, whatever. You guys rock. Appreciate you making this all possible. And your boy turned 23. So extra thank you to everybody who supported us during my Fast Freddie Jackson year. The Aaron Neesmith year is here, and it is going to be incredible, folks. Lock in. Anyways, with that, as always, I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.